at least for now. So I'll flip it back to you to comment on that or to make your pick at the 107.
Yeah, Quinshon Judkins is going to be the example of how NCAA 25 kind of changes dynasty and changes fantasy football in terms of knowing recruits. Because seriously, I'm not going to lie. I'll get dunked on for maybe not knowing who he was coming into the season, but I did not know who he was coming into the season. And then before the season started, the first time you play against Ohio State or with Ohio State, you know who Quinshon Judkins is because his elusiveness, his spin move just in the game are incredible. And the one thing, I had Judkins and Henderson like this before last week, and I don't want to overreact too much to one game, but I'm not liking TreVeyon Henderson much anymore because Michigan was daring them to run against light boxes. One running back looked awful. I mean, awful. Unusable. Awful. Slow, plotter, couldn't find the holes. That was TreVeyon Henderson. And one guy was making people miss behind the line of scrimmage, making something out of nothing, finding the holes in the zone schemes. And that was Quinshon Judkins. And it was very evident watching that game. Like, oh, here's a tough situation for a running back against two first-round defensive tackles at Michigan. One is answering the call and looking decent doing it, and the other looks like they do not deserve to be called on an NFL draft board. And so Henderson's falling down my rankings. Judkins is rising. I do have a receiver in between him and Judkins, and I will be taking him with my pick, and that is Ohio State receiver Emeka Egbuka. So in 2022, he was an early breakout with over 1,100 receiving yards, 74 receptions, and 10 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, 12 total touchdowns, 2 on the ground, with a little-known guy named Marvin Harrison Jr. around, and C.J. Stroud quarterbacking that team. The next year, stats fall off a little bit. Marvin Harrison Jr. still around, but Kyle McCord, not really a guy that's going to level up in offense in college, as we saw in Syracuse. So Egbuka has all the talent, and a lot of people said, and I even heard this at Thanksgiving, one of my uncles said, I heard Egbuka staying out of the last year's draft was the worst thing that ever happened to him. I don't know if that's going to end up being the case. Everyone knew he had no shot of being a first-round pick, and if we look at how the draft played out, he probably would have been a mid-second-round pick. Maybe that's where he is again, but that's a pretty good floor to have to get paid another year to go play at college football, and you don't lose, really anything on your draft stock. You get to kind of re-roll and stand out more in a weaker wide receiver class. So he has all the tools. He's a refined route runner. He's from that Brian Hartline tree, and he really can win in all phases of the game: downfield, short, intermediate, winning by separation, contested catch situations, red zone targets. He's just very refined, but because those box score numbers haven't been great, he seems kind of boring, but I think Egbuka is going to go higher than we think. I think he's going to land in a great spot because he's a pro from a program that people trust.
Yeah, I think he has a really good shot, like a better than good shot of being a first-round pick in the NFL draft. And if he gets a good landing spot, he's absolutely justifiable in the mid-first round. He's having a better year than my pick here at the 108, Luther Burden. And I'm not really sure. We've talked about Luther Burden before on this show, but Luther Burden, I'm not really sure what happened. Not really sure what happened to Missouri this year as a program. They just came out flat. Yeah, maybe that had something to do with it, but over 1,200 receiving yards in 2023, and in this year, about 600 receiving yards. His receptions were down by 25 total receptions. They did use him a little, like he was a little bit more successful in the rushing game, which is kind of weird, but I guess if you compare this year to last year, 8 total touchdowns this year, 9 touchdowns last year. So the touchdowns didn't fall off, but the narrative is, this guy, his production fell off, and it did. But I still have to believe that the evaluation coming into this year which he was the consensus wide receiver one entering the season. I have to believe that there's still some juice there, and I think it increases his chances of finding a good spot, because before he was likely going to be drafted, maybe top 10, top 15, maybe to a bad offense with a bad quarterback. Now maybe he falls down the draft board a little bit. Maybe he gets scooped up by an organization that's wide receiver needy and is competent. Maybe, I don't know, this is a bad example, but what happens if the Packers draft him, or what happens? I mean, I know that situation's crowded, so that's probably not the best example. Like what if the Bengals, what if T. Higgins goes away and the Bengals draft him? Something like that. So again, not not necessarily a perfect example, but I still believe in the talent. I have more tape work to do on Luther Burden, but right now I have him at number 7 in my one quarterback ranking. So I'll throw it to you at the one, or that was the 108. I'll throw it to you to the 109 to either to comment on Luther Burden or make your pick or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I believe in Luther Burden. I generally don't think that this talent just evaporates over 1 year. I do think there are a lot of extenuating circumstances in Missouri. I do think expectations had something to do with it. I really think there's a difference between having the same team year over year that overperformed 1 year, and now all of a sudden you're ranked 10 in the nation in the year with the first college football playoff. All of a sudden that just completely changes the way you have to go about your season as Missouri, having expectations as a football team as the first time, having a quarterback that isn't really good. Again, their whole team overperformed last year. And we saw that leak into Luther Burden, just the offense, regressed. And college players, unless they're the generational talents, are not necessarily going to elevate their entire roster. If CeeDee Lamb didn't have a quarterback and Oklahoma played a slow, methodical run game, his box score stats may not have been, what we thought they were. So we have to look past that a little bit. I don't value Luther Burden right now higher than my pick here, Tre Harris, the alpha out of Ole Miss. I think he checks more boxes in terms of his requisite size speed. The comp I've been continuing to make just from a size speed comparison, not necessarily a play style yet, I need to dive into that, is Nico Collins. We want that prototypical X. We want that dominant X because they are the most fantasy relevant targets, and they are typically the highest target earners. So when you look at a guy like Nico Collins, who's getting, the roughly 25+% of the targets, probably closer to 30 on a team that's, a high passing volume offense, insert Tre Harris into one of those situations. Let's say just taking a look at the board here, if he were to go to say, I don't know, the LA Chargers, him with Justin Herbert would be a cheat code. It would be incredible because not only is Tre Harris, let me pull up the size here, 6'3", 210 listed as of right now with a 4.55 projected 40. If we say, it's between 4.5, 4.55, that's good size speed. So not game breaking, but good size speed from Tre Harris there. And, he came from a small school at Louisiana Tech, dominated their production early on, had over 30% of the team's yards and touchdowns. Then he goes over into Ole Miss, does the exact same thing at a SEC school, becomes Jackson Dart's number 1 guy. The box score numbers aren't there this year because he's only played 8 games. But when you take the per game stats, he's right up there again, 30+% of the team's production share, if you want to call it, for the wide receiver position. And he's proven it at both levels. He proved that he was not a flash in the pan at Louisiana Tech. He can do this with stiff competition. And he has the size speed. If he gets that draft capital, it is game over for Tre Harris. He has to be a top 10 pick.
Yeah, that's not crazy at all. I have Tre Harris. Where do I have Tre? I have him at number 9 overall in my one quarterback rookie rankings right now. One spot behind the guy that we disagree upon, and that's TreVeyon Henderson, and that's going to be my pick here. And when I was looking at him last year, I was really excited because I saw a little bit of Marshawn Lynch to his game. I get it. He hasn't really. I mean, he's sharing a backfield with a running back that's, I think, more talented than him. Ohio State really wanted to load up for a national championship, and gosh, Ryan Day's. I mean, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole right now, but really feeling the heat. But his production this year hasn't really tapered off too much from the last 3 seasons, even with Judkins in the backfield. And I get it. He had a terrible game against Michigan. Judkins didn't. I mean, the whole team really didn't perform that well against Michigan. They should have performed a lot better. But you look at the total body of work, you look at the skill set. You know, he's caught 19 passes last year. He's caught 19 passes this year. Decent receiver out of the backfield. So, again, another one of these guys, 5'10", 208, a little bit undersized, not quite the Judkins, size, but big enough. I still like TreVeyon Henderson enough to take him at the 110, which is, I believe, where we are with the 110.
Yep, and for what it's worth, I moved him down significantly from my point of view, but that was also only down to 11 on my board right now. I stared at between him and Nicholas Singleton for a while. Somebody who's really starting to catch my eye, but kept TreVeyon Henderson just because I didn't want to overreact too much to one game, and there was a whole body of work that put him where he was in my rankings. So, but it did force me to take some guys like Trey Harris, and even in one quarterback league, Shedeur Sanders is who I'll be taking here with my next pick here at the 111.
Oh my God!
I firmly believe quarterbacks with rushing floors should be first-round picks in dynasty drafts. It matters too much. We talked about the quarterback bubble on our last mock and everything, and I firmly believe everything I said there. I do think that Shedeur Sanders is not only going to go highly drafted. We know this. I think he's going to go to a pretty decent situation. Granted, maybe not ownership-wise, but let's look at Tankathon. So we have the Jacksonville Jaguars at the number 1 pick right now. Obviously, that's a no-go. We have the Las Vegas Raiders and the New York Giants next. On the surface, you laugh at that. But in Vegas, Shedeur Sanders will be tethered to Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. Maybe they go out and make a splash, or at least sign someone worth their salt and maybe grab a running back. It's not a terrible situation to start off in. Having brought Aiden O'Connell just put up 20-plus fantasy points on the Kansas City Chiefs as a Raider. We're starting in Superflex leagues, Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, whoever plays. So why on earth would we not want Shedeur Sanders in that situation? The floor is palpitizing, man. I can't get over it because he's a playmaker. And even if he goes to the Giants, he can be paired with Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Tyrone Tracy in the backfield. If it's Devin Singletary, if they bring in somebody else. Again, not, whoa, look at this great spot he's landing in. But it's not like he landed in Carolina of last year where there's just nobody. Or in the Bears pre-DJ Moore where there was nobody. There's at least guys that you can rely on here. And he has that rushing floor to where I'm too enticed to push him out of the first round. If there were better prospects here, I would go for it. I just don't love the back end of this class right now enough to push a guy like Shedeur Sanders out of the first round.
You say rushing floor, and I believe you. But just for the record, and I know it's college, like his rushing stats haven't necessarily been all that great.
Yeah,
college.
and I think there's a little twofold there. I think it's a good thing. There's a good and a bad. There's the A, where I do think it's good that he is not immediately looking to run. Where I would like to, I guess there's two bads, because I would like to see more designed runs. I think that's an offensive flaw. I don't know if Deion doesn't want to expose Shedeur and, open him up to getting hurt on tape. I don't know. But the there's too much athleticism that we see in his gameplay for him not to be able to move around. So I understand, and that is a very fair argument. The box score stats are not there for his rushing, and I can't quite pin that down. What I do know is he does have a throw-first mindset, which to translate into the NFL, I do think is good. The bad is he does tend to hold on to that ball a little long, wait for those plays to develop, and then not take off, which we kind of saw a similar thing with Caleb, right? What's he doing? He's bouncing around. He wants to make that big play through the air. And it's a bad thing on the surface, but again, I don't necessarily think it's that bad because that's something that can be coached. Should run. Just go. Because we see it with Caleb. He's put up like a 60-plus rushing yard game. He had almost 100 yards, I think, against the Packers.
But so again, Caleb's rushing has way more rushing yards than Shedeur Sanders.
It was more palpable in college. I understand, and I'm not saying, but I don't think I'm wrong here that Shedeur is going to be running more in the NFL than in college.
Fair enough. I disagree with taking Shedeur Sanders. Just so if somebody's yelling at us in the comments,
that's fine. We hardly ever disagree on anything.
Direct it toward Matt Babbage, not to me. So
go for it.
Yeah. So, anywho, that's the 111, Shedeur Sanders. We're gonna have to do a Shedeur Sanders film study together. I think that would be some pretty good content because we've got a whole bunch of tape just waiting to be watched.
Absolutely,
I can't wait. So that leaves me at the 112, and I've gone back and forth between Ollie Gordon and Nick Singleton, and just to be different, and because I really liked him on tape. I'm just going to take Nick Singleton to close out this rookie mock draft because I feel like he deserves to be in the first round in a one quarterback rookie draft. And here's the deal. Like Penn State, the running back at Penn State, because, what am I trying to say here? I think Nicholas Singleton kind of goes underrated because of the other running back
because he's not the best running back in his backfield. We can say it.
Yeah.
We don't have to take it away from him. Like he can be good and not be the best running back in his backfield. I've struggled with that a lot. Yeah. But it's okay.
Yeah. But I will say he's been consistent when he's been there, and whenever I've watched him play, he's always popped on tape to me. Now, I have more work to do on him, but you just even go back to his the 2022 season at Penn State, 12 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards rushing. And then these last two seasons, over 700 rushing yards, already over 700 this season. Well, I guess the season's over, isn't it? The regular season, that is. But so we've finished that, but with 50 less carries, similar production. And what I really like is his ability to catch passes out of the backfield.
Oh, yeah.
26 receptions last year, over 30 this year, and 4 receiving touchdowns. Again, with Katron Allen in the backfield with him. So, again, it's going to be so fun to see them go up against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. I have that one on my calendar on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th.
Oh, yeah.
To watch, to see how he performs in that game. But Nicholas Singleton is slowly becoming, or quickly becoming, rather, one of my favorite prospects to watch in this draft. And a guy who could rise above, say, a TreVeyon Henderson in my rankings. We'll see. We'll see if that happens.